Starwalker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, a podcast all about tabletop role-playing games from the perspective of the captain's chair. This episode is brought to you by Texas Beard Company. Use the coupon code GameMaster for a 15% discount at texasbeardcompany.com. Kevin and Evan from the LoadedDice podcast network join me to continue our discussion of Star Wars Edge of the Empire. This is part 2 of a 3-part interview. So join me on the journey. Together, we can become game masters truly worthy of the title. Hello, listener. Greetings, fellow GM and or player. Welcome to episode 48 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. I'm very excited to be coming at you again today with another part of my 3-part interview with Kevin and Evan from the LoadedDice podcast network. Specifically, they are running a Star Wars Edge of the Empire campaign. Evan is the GM and Kevin is one of the players, and they are producing their campaign as an actual play podcast. And the name of the campaign and the podcast is The Whiskey Rebellion. And it's really good stuff. They have a lot of fun and a lot of laughs, and it's very entertaining to listen to. But also it's a great window into the system and how you can use the system to have a really great gaming experience with lots of improvisation and unexpected happenings, both good and bad. And they do a really great job of leveraging the storytelling potential of the Star Wars system and the unique dice system that it has. So it's a really cool podcast to listen to just for that reason. Now, Kevin and Evan both have some experience with improvisational comedy, and they bring that to their gaming table. And so we're kind of following a bigger arc of episodes with this theme of improvisation in role-playing games and how it can greatly enhance your game, whether you're the GM or a player. And as I've said on previous episodes, you know, there are a lot of systems out there that have mechanics or suggestions that help you do this. The Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars system is just one of these. However, if you're playing a game that doesn't have these systems baked into it, you can still use improvisation in your game. Don't let your game of choice, don't let your system of choice limit you in what you can do. You can always do whatever you want. I think that this improvisational stuff, really, it doesn't need to be part of the mechanics of your game. And in some ways, I think it actually works better if it's not part of the mechanics, because that can give this impression of, well, you know, we can do whatever we want, but only in these ways. And it's like, no, you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, in any way that you want. So I am going to move on to the interview, and real quick before we do the interview, I want to talk about our sponsor, Texas Beard Company. I usually like to do this more towards the middle of the show, but last week I had a really hard time finding a good spot to put it in without, you know, disjointing the interview. Kevin and Evan and I had a great discussion that went for quite a while, and it was hard enough to split it into 3 parts for 3 separate episodes without losing the rhythm that we had. So I don't want to further chop it up by trying to put up my sponsor message in the middle of it. So I'm going to do it at the top of the show today before the interview, and then we can just do the interview uninterrupted. So Texas Beard Company produces handmade beard care products in Texas. They have amazing products, really well made. I use their products myself. And one thing I want to mention that I haven't mentioned before is because their products are all natural and they don't have things like silicone in them and other things that might affect your skin in a negative way, And, you know, this is anecdotal, but for me personally, I have eczema. I have very sensitive skin to the point where I can only use soaps that don't have any fragrances, don't have any dyes. Same with shampoo. I have to be very careful about any kind of lotion or anything that I put on my skin has to basically be free of fragrance, free of dye, free of silicone and other things that you really don't want to be putting on your skin anyway. So I was a little, I wouldn't say worried, but I was a little concerned when I first got their beard oil because it is scented with essential oils. But I have had zero problems with it. In fact, I feel like the skin of my face where my beard is feels better than it ever has. So, you know, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a dermatologist, but from my personal experience as someone with very sensitive skin and eczema, I have had zero problems with their products and I highly recommend them. So check them out at texasbeardcompany.com and use the coupon code GameMaster at checkout for a 15% discount, and you get free shipping on all orders over $25. So thank you very much for listening to me go on about Texas Beard Company. I try to keep these short, but I do really like their products, so I tend to go on and on about it, but I'll try not to do that too much. But we're gonna get to the interview now. I'm gonna open the hailing frequencies and get Kevin and Evan on the comms, and we're gonna talk some more about Star Wars.
Also, it's interesting because we run with such a large group in this game, and it's actually something that I don't necessarily advise, but I will also tell plenty of people who run games out there, don't be afraid of it either. The biggest obstacle with having bigger groups is basically figuring out time management and figuring out how to let everybody have moments, and not everyone's going to have a moment in every single game session, but make sure that there's something there. Yeah. And also, like we were just talking of, like, deputize one person to help you out with the shit where you're just like, hey, roll this dice for the monsters, this is their place in the initiative. That's an ultimate help. If you are a player listening to this, help your GM. If they look like they need some help, just be like, hey, do you want me to do that thing? Because most of the time they will say yes, unless they are a shitbird and say, no, it's behind the screen. This is a line of demarcation. See,
shitbag player index under shitbag DM.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but the biggest thing with, like, don't be afraid of running bigger groups. It just means you have to figure out more interesting ways to have conflict, and you can emphasize storytelling, because one of the biggest things that always ruins any large group of playing is a combat. Yeah. So change the way that you do combat. Rather than having, like, an army of well-armed orcs show up, have a bunch of orcs who are a little bit more ragtag, and they have half hit points, but they do maximum damage, which means that your crew can, like, slaughter through them really quickly, but it's still going to be a dangerous scenario.
Yeah.
Like, it's all about making the stakes feel high while you're able to control the amount of time and energy that you're putting into stuff.
And this is another thing that's awesome about this Star Wars system, right? Is, well, two things. One, it's not a system that's built around combat per se, right? It's not a D&D 4E where in the Dungeon Master's Guide, it's like design an encounter, then make up some interstitial bullshit, then design an encounter, then make up some more interstitial bullshit. Because we're really playing a tactics game, and don't get me wrong, I love 4E, I love my tactics games. Don't get me wrong about that. But what's cool about this for larger groups is that it's not designed around combat. So, one, players aren't incentivized to just be murder hobos, right? Like just moving around the world, ending lives. The other thing is that, you know, so we have things during the game, you know, like we have Dr. Wu and the Jawas, right? So we've had scenes where half the party is merely a distraction for the other half of the party who's getting into combat, getting up to shenanigans or something like that, right? And so we've had vibro slap checks, rocking the house checks. Like we've set a Wookiee on fire as a distraction.
The Wookiee drummer, right? I just listened to that today. Yeah. That was awesome.
So we've done that, but also I will say that where there is a little bit more granular combat, in space combat, I love what this system has done in giving everyone something to do. So, you mentioned that space combat that we've released. You know, the Wookiee is banging on the hull of the ship with a hydro spanner like Chewbacca, you know, repairing some hull damage maybe, and Runa Dax, Girl Explorer, is totally ruining things in the engine room while trying to be helpful. And sure, Cal Maverick, myself, Cal Maverick, Captain the Spruce Bantha, is trying to pilot and hold things together. You know, but then the really shooty characters like Gaz Isk, he can get on a turret and shoot. You know, and everybody has something to do in space combat in a way that I find fantastic. Like I'm really impressed.
It was something that they actually made sure to bring over from like the Saga edition that TSR had, because that was something that would definitely ruin any possible game, is the whole concept of like, you're in outer space, but only one of you is in charge of the ship. Right.
Yeah.
And like, I mean,
that would work for me as the pilot, but I don't know about
well, for
just a room filled with people sitting around being like, Kevin, you are so awesome. Oh my god!
Can I hold your dice, Kevin?
Yeah. Keep them warm.
At no point.
Jiggle them around. Don't let them get stagnant.
Kevin's statements represent no piece of reality and not be verified in any way.
I just want to submit, if Dr. Wu ever fires those Jawas who never seem to do much of anything, I would like to submit a possible new title, Dr. Wu and the Flaming Wookiee, for his band. I think that would be great.
I think it's going to be a side project. I think we got a side project.
I feel like that's his experimental period.
Yes. Well, no, that could be like his super ultra like pop high concept metal period. Like the Flaming Wookiee feels like I'm imagining like a Wookiee that's not actually on fire. It's more got like one of those ridiculous haircuts, hair dye job things. What the ombres or whatever.
Oh yeah, right? Like,
amber. Amber or whatever, but like pink and purple and orange. Like, yeah, that's what I'm envisioning.
I was going down King Crimson territory.
Oh, all right. No, I'm on board with that too.
Well, you know, you have a ship full of Wookiees, so he could put together a whole nother band of just Wookiees, set them all on fire, and then be Dr. Wu and the Flaming Wookiees, and that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, they only had one show, but it was legendary.
That stadium stunk for weeks.
Oh man,
it smells like burnt hair in here. What's going on?
I think actually, I mean, and this is maybe actually instructive in that I think in order to make that work, right? So we were trying to, the band was trying to put on a distraction
with pyrotechnics,
and rolled a failure with, I think it was with advantage. I'm not sure. It doesn't matter. But right, so the idea of like, they did not rock the house, but what happened was the Wookiee caught on fire, right? And that was a distraction, right? So it was like a totally different way of approaching the scenario.
Yeah.
And then Dubs, who plays Furry Bear, the well-named Wookiee, he flipped a one of those force points,
Destiny,
right? Destiny dice, not a Destiny dice, a Destiny
chip.
Destiny chip, what have you, to say, oh, and by the way, at the beginning of the show, I know how you are, Dr. Wu, so I covered my fur with that flame retardant gel, so that way I won't, And like, of course, that wouldn't happen. We wouldn't do that in combat, but like as like a means of telling a story and kind of being funny and being entertaining and entertaining ourselves. I thought that was Star Wars dice and Star Wars mechanics in a nutshell.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Because it not to toot our own horn, but Dubs did a really good job with it in that, it's okay, well, we failed, but we're telling the story in a different way, and we're using those fate chips in a way that's novel and interesting and not ruining the game, not breaking the game, and also not just overly mechanistic, right?
Right.
Yeah. And I also think, like, as I was saying before, it being a really great bridging the gap kind of scenario, especially for new players, like Dubs has played a couple of different role-playing games. He hasn't had a whole bunch of great experiences, but right now he's actually preparing to start running a Star Wars Fantasy Flight game.
Oh, cool.
Because he was able to grasp the way these rules work and the way that we play. And no, it will probably not be some super granular thing, though he has gotten very much into the rules lawyering lately. Yeah, he spent a weekend reading that book cover to cover, and he's like, I have thoughts.
You got ideas. But yeah, and what's cool about that game that he's going to be running is it's going to be all new role players, all people that have never played RPGs or played very little RPGs.
Oh, fun.
So,
yeah, and him as a new GM.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to be a fun disaster experiment. So I'm rooting for him. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about the dice, I would love to hear from you guys because you have more experience with the system than me. And I talked to you guys a little bit about this over email about what one listener referred to as relentless granularity of the system. And I've been wondering how I'm going to cope with this myself when I GM the system, which is where, you know, you're invoking all this potential in these dice pools with every single roll. And do you ever have times, Evan, when you just kind of want to get on with the story and you get a little annoyed with the amount of time that it takes with every roll? And if so, like, how do you cope with that, or how do you get around that?
Oh yeah, actually, a session that we played last weekend got a little granular, and the trick is know where you are going to fight your battles and what you are going to fight your battles over, because somebody like Dr. Wu hitting on some alien chick or dude, like, that is not the most important role, and maybe I'll make him do it, but it's going to be something very simple, and he has it well within his understanding and being to be like, yeah, so major failure, but a lot of advantage. And I'm like, well, you don't get a date with her, but her cousin who's hanging out with her, well, she's all on board for this ride. And like, I don't need to fight the battle over hitting on chicks. Like, right. I have no stakes in that. It's not going to result in anybody dying in the party. And that's something that you have to realize, especially with this game. Like, the importance of roles is directly related to what the possible outcomes of them are. Okay. If you think something could end up having an absolutely catastrophic, changing the story type of thing, yeah, you probably should roll for that one. Right. But if it's going to be something where it's like, something as simple as what I said earlier, like, take it easy. You don't have to worry about him getting a blue dice later on as a boost because he was wearing her favorite perfume.
Yeah. Well,
that's a good one. I'll write that down.
Yeah.
Actually, now that I think about it, it wouldn't be perfume, but her brand of space vodka is on his breath.
Yeah, that's better.
It's Dr. Wu after all.
That is perfume in the Outer Rim, isn't it?
Yeah.
Little behind the ears, or tentacles,
lobes of whatever sort. Yeah. I mean, my answer to that is similar, although maybe less artful, because that's why Evan is the GM, right? Mine is like sheer. It's a combination of two things: one, sheer force of will, and two, trusting each other. Right, so much like what Evan was talking about, as a group, we basically know when to get super granular and talk about, like, all right, what does this advantage really mean, and does a blue dice get involved, and when it's like, just roll a bunch of dice, some stuff happened, time for a joke, moving on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, so and I think Evan talked about it before, that I think some people do get frustrated with us as we're playing because we very much pick and choose when we're going to be relentlessly granular, which, by the way, is a fantastic phrase that I will be using maybe for the rest of my life. I'll think about it on my deathbed. It's so good.
Yeah.
So good. But right, so I think that some listeners would be frustrated with us because sometimes we just blow right through it like a bunch of advantage. Something funny happened that has nothing to do with anything. Moving on. You know, and like, you know, we'll just ignore it or blow through it because no, not every role really deserves like a real intense contemplation of you know, what this might mean. You know, sometimes it's like, guess what? Your bonus is you laughed. You got a joke out of it. And I think it's something about one being sloppy, drunken role players, and I think it's also a little bit, you know, on the positive side of the coin, just trusting each other, just the group having a sense for the story, for where we are in the story, and also Evan keeping us honest. Like that's the other thing is that there have been times where we're like, more jokes. It's time for more jokes. Jokes about, and Evan's like, no, you don't understand. It's serious, and we're like, oh,
this is serious business, man.
Yeah. So Evan kind of keeps us on task there, right? Because he has the big picture in mind. So if we ever do run astray, right? If we ever do as a group, something's not clear to us, I think very easily, you know, Evan can keep us on track. And also to Evan's credit, he also he's also not kind of a Nazi about that either. Like I think there's something coming up in the recordings that we're going to release where Gretchen, who I mentioned, is like a little bit of a beginning role player, and we were in a very tense scene, and her character concept is something along the lines of, she calls herself a swamp critter, but she's basically a hick, right? You know, she's playing a hick, right? So, and she, you know, she's trying to get into it and she doesn't know what to do. So we're in this tense negotiation scene and she's like, I offer, I think it was Zuckus or someone like Zuckus.
Yeah.
Like, I offer Zuckus a warm Pabst Blue Ribbon. And like, even though we were kind of in the middle of an intense scene, like because it was a big moment for Gretchen where she was kind of jumping out of her shell a little bit and she was doing a little bit of role playing and things like that. Like Evan's like, yes, you do. And he loves it, you know? And
nice.
You know, I think that that's cool. And I think that it relates to like what role playing games are about, you know, over the long term. Because if you want to play like a super tactical game, like go play Imperial Assault. If you want, you know, or X-Wing or something like that, which are awesome games that I play all the time. But when I sit down and play a role playing game, I want to laugh. I want to laugh with my friends. I want to stretch my mind. You know, we have a phrase, you know, that role playing games, if you're doing them right, they're basically like improv comedy with dice. And that's very much what our philosophy is with the Whiskey Rebellion.
Yeah, because you can think of the dice as the audience yelling that thing out at you.
Yeah.
Like, they're there to help you and give you the flexibility and inspiration to do or say something that you normally wouldn't. And, like, I can guarantee that there have been moments in the game where somebody has asked if they can roll something just for the simple fact that something ridiculous extra might come out of asking for a roll.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not going to deny anyone. It's like, oh, I want to do this thing. I'm like, okay. They're like, oh, do I roll for it? How difficult? I'm like, fucking like average. Like just roll it and let's see what happens. And you'll hear me throw out a lot of like average dice rolls, and it's really just for the simple idea of mixing it up in cases where it's like, no, it's not going to be anything that's insane or even easy dice roll. It's just to see what could happen.
Sure. Yeah.
Rather than just me saying things to the group. And this is actually one of the biggest changes, the whole dice mechanic thing, not to keep harping on the dice so much, but this has actually been the biggest rescue for me as a GM, because when I was trying to run Pathfinder games or like Eberron games and stuff like that, I spent so much time, and I mean weeks, days, like planning out every possible scenario, nook and cranny of a cave, and what it resulted in was nobody ever going into that fucking cave. Like, that's all it ever. And the same thing has happened in the Star Wars game, that like Whiskey Rebellion could have gone in a bunch of different directions, and effectively I went in there with these dice as a comfort in being okay with anything possibly happening. And what's gotten created from it is something so incredibly impressive and out of control that I don't think most of the people realize that all of the world that they're living in, which I think is a great connection to make with Star Wars. Like, it's all about the world, and the world that they're living in would continue going on in whatever direction it was going, and it's only through their intervening that things are going to change. And they don't know what half of that stuff might be yet, and they are going to change 100 other things before the end of this campaign. But it's the comfort of just being like, you know what? I don't need to write a treatise. Like, if you want to tell a story that is your story, write a fucking novel. Don't run a game.
Yeah. Good advice.
Like, that's not the thing.
Right, and there's so many improv concepts that lend themselves so well to RPG playing that I feel like they just, one makes you better at the other. And trust me, I'm no improv, like, don't get me wrong, I happen to be an admirer of the craft. If you want actual people who improv and play Star Wars Edge of the Empire, please go listen to the Campaign podcast. It's the better version of ours, to be 100% frank with you. And they also do another podcast called One Shot, where they explore one-shot adventures with a whole bunch of different systems. I don't know if you've listened to them, Lex, but I can't recommend them enough. But those are actual improvers. But, you know, there's concepts in terms of improv of the idea of yes and no but. Right. The idea that no matter what someone says, your response has to be some version of yes and blah 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 blah, or no but something, you know, finding that kind of middle ground, right? Rather than, because I think we've all been there where a role-playing game comes to a screeching halt because, you know, someone says no it didn't, that didn't happen, you know, and then all of a sudden it's like, ah! All right, how do we back out of this part? And it's like Austin Powers, where it's like, oh, no, we're stuck.
Nothing more painful than being at an improv show and having somebody just be like, "No, I can't see the donkey behind me." Like, well,
exactly.
My fingers are guns and you're dead. No, I'm not. I'm a god. Like, you're bad at this. Stop it.
And the same thing with jumping into their world, right? That's another concept from improv. The idea that you just, no matter what world someone presents in front of you, you're in it now. Like, you're not operating.
That's your reality.
It's your reality, and you're telling the same story together. And that's why I think those are really strongly tied together aspects. And one of the things that I think we're really trying to accomplish with our game.
And also, if you want to think of the whole concept of yes and, like, for people who are still struggling with any sort of granularity with the dice, think of the dice as your yes and no buts. Like, it's right there built into the game. It's like, that's yes, you succeed and this other thing happens, or no, you don't succeed, but this other thing goes in your favor. It's all there at your hands, and you can use it as deeply or as shallowly as you like, because maybe you're a role player ROLL type, and like you want blue dice, as many blue dice for fucking like
all the blue dice,
packing your Wookiee satchel with all the finest gadgets, or you're like the rest of us and you flip one of those Destiny coins and you're like, oh yeah, but I have that thing.
Right.
I flip Destiny coins against us, which is awesome. which is fun. Like, this story would be better if things went worse for us. Here we go.
Yeah.
But I love that point, Evan. That's why I pay you in things like booze and Game Master screens. that was dude. I'm very impressed.
Yes, and lots of Star Wars.
Hey, that's better than most GMs make, you know.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I'll take booze and GM screens any day.
Yeah, we've got taps, Lex. Like, you would love it, man. You got to come over and do an episode of Beer Tasters.
Fuck yeah, that'd be awesome.
Screw that. Come for an episode of Whiskey Rebellion.
Yeah, man.
If you ever find yourself here, you can absolutely be a guest star.
Invited anytime.
Sweet, that would be awesome. Now I got a reason to go to the east.
Yeah, man.
The Far East.
Yes. The trailing edge of the United States of America.
So, Evan, I'm curious, as a game master of Star Wars, have you or have you not ever used the line, "Don't fuck with a Jedi Master"?
I have not. Only due to the simple fact that our storyline has not led in that direction. But maybe if a certain guest star did show up at some point, I could absolutely throw that in there.
We'll definitely get in there. I'll say this, like, so first of all, Evan has I think we mentioned it before, but Evan has thrown characters in our way that we were not to be fucked with, and that did not deter us necessarily.
No, never.
But also, I think that the more interesting point, and I know it's something that you've touched on with Josh and something you've touched on with Ben, Lex, but the idea that, like, Edge of the Empire in particular, but really all of these Star Wars role-playing games are not really about Jedi, right?
Right.
They are more, if they're in the game, they're closer to a force of nature than they are, like an actual person that you could maybe consider fighting or something like that.
Right.
It's much more this interesting blend of Western or space fantasy or military drama, and that's what this role playing system kind of focuses on. And I love that.
Yeah. So speaking of that, what are some of the challenges you guys have faced in blending all those different aspects of Star Wars together and satisfying not only everyone at the table but everybody listening?
The party almost breaking up and Evan having to take me aside and console me.
Yeah, I mean, they're realistically, I touched on this before. The reason I haven't run into as many challenges is because of the more freewheeling nature. Like, we are playing this first and foremost to have fun with each other, and that's probably the best thing ever. Like, every single month I look forward to being like, okay, these are my story pieces that are going to be happening at this point in time. Like, we had a really, and you'll get there eventually, but I jump around in the character's own timeline, and like we jump ahead because there's not going to be anything interesting happening for whatever stretch of time that they weren't doing anything. Okay. So fast forward.
Yeah. Like,
we go to the next movie. Like, Luke is now on Tatooine trying to trick a Hutt into getting his friend back and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's actually a great point. And Evan, this is something that I love, that you do that I love, which is that you really make very good use of the cinematic quality and the cinematic framework that Star Wars naturally provides, and that the game system lends itself to. So you are a huge user, and we'll, and Lex, you've probably heard it, but we literally say, okay, it's time for a Lucas wipe, right? Yeah. And we'll do a scene wipe where, okay, now we're on these two characters, and so we're not afraid to split the party if we need to.
Yeah.
And so, we're dealing with something right now where two of our characters are off getting Jedi training while the rest of the characters are off on a heist, and we're Lucas wiping back and forth, and we're finding ways to participate in each other's adventures and talk to each other and stuff like that. But, you can tell all those stories because essentially Star Wars is all those things, and the system is flexible enough to handle it.
Yes.
Awesome.
But going back to like any sort of challenge, I think the challenge is containing yourself a lot of the time because of the amount of freedom. Like, you don't need to throw everything out the window. Hold on to, if you had a story kernel when you were writing your idea for the game, and it looks like that's not going to happen because some player shot some dude in the knee and now he can't go adventuring anymore. Instead of just throwing that out the window, see if you can put it somewhere else. See if that can be applied to a completely different character, or if pieces of it can be used again or reassembled or thrown in. Because if you came up with the idea and you liked it enough to write it down and be like, this I'm going to give to my players, then it's going to be worth it later on. They're never going to know what you changed or what you didn't change.
Right.
And I come with a very thin notebook and my DM screen and dice, and that's about it. Like, a lot of it, I am structuring the story a little bit on paper, but largely on the place and time of the game, because I'm already used to being way too granular in old styles of gaming, and it ends up being way more frustration, where it's like, I came up with all these encounters and now none of those encounters are happening. The number of combats that this party has never gotten into is astounding. And you know what? Those stormtroopers will show up someplace later.
All at once.
We've been waiting for you. Auto fire.
In a bank account with interest.
Well, since you guys mentioned it a few times, I'm going to real quickly just thank our sponsor, Lucas Wipes, compostable, biodegradable, recyclable. Refresh your bathroom and yourself with Lucas Wipes today.
They're great for turkey necks too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I heard that they actually stole those from the Kurosawa company. But I don't know. There's pending litigation on that, right? Or is that Kurosawa Wipes? Is that
Kurosawa Wipes?
Oh, poor
Well, that is going to wrap up episode 48 of Game Master's Journey. We are going to be hitting episode 50 very soon. Before the end of season 3, we will have hit episode 50, which is pretty cool. If you would like to reach me, you can email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can find me on Google+, just look for Lex Starwalker, and you can find me on Twitter at Lex Starwalker. Please visit the website, starwalkerstudios.com, and check out the show notes for this episode, episode 48, to get links to various things that we talked about in the episode today. I will also have links to Kevin and Evan's Whiskey Rebellion podcast, as well as some of the other Loaded Dice Network podcasts, including their Loaded Dice Cast, which is their flagship podcast about role-playing games and I think kind of whatever they want to talk about, and also their Learn About Beer podcast, which is an excellent podcast about beer. You can also, in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com, find our Patreon button if you'd like to check out my Patreon page and watch the video and become a patron. That would be awesome. There's also a donate button in the show notes if you'd like to give me a one-time donation. I know not everyone can or wants to become a patron on a monthly basis, so one-time donations work well too. And also iTunes and Stitcher buttons if you want to go check us out on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. I really appreciate everyone who's left reviews. And at the bottom of the show notes, you can find a link to our Google Plus community where you can network with fellow RPG nerds. And you can find a link to my YouTube channel where I've got actual plays of Star Wars and D&D and Numenera and other games. And you can also find the link to a free 30-day trial of Audible books, courtesy of Game Master's Journey. So I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I will be back very soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey and the conclusion of this Loaded Dice interview. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.